Welcome to the second part of our class concerning radiation and the meter we received from our grant. Current situation is, not long ago we could have told you there was no specific threat. However, in 2003, Osama bin Laden and other terrorists gave carte blanche permission to use weapons of mass destruction. The threat of nuclear attack increases as more nations develop nuclear capabilities. Is there a nuclear terrorism threat? Yes. Rogue nations have been developing nuclear material for many years, and they are more than willing to use them or sell them to make weapons of mass destruction. Is there a nuclear terrorism threat? Yes. We can go from the top of the spectrum, which is a megacurie, all the way down to a picocurie, which is in a smoke detector in your house that you're around every day that will not hurt you. Anything in between can be used in a weapon of mass destruction to cause pure chaos. This map here shows the amount of sources that have been recovered in the states. As you can see, there's 73 sources that have been recovered just in Indiana alone, and many sources that have been recovered in the surrounding states. What can you do? Your everyday job utilizing radiological and nuclear device training and equipment. We're going to go over a case study in Brazil. There was a hospital that had been decommissioned, and some scrap metal hunters found a unit and dismantled it for scrap. What they didn't know is that that unit contained 1.4 kilocuries of cesium-137. They took those pieces out and thought they were really cool because they were glowing blue stones. Children and adults played with them. It really wasn't a good thing because it is a source of radiation. 112,000 people were surveyed at an Olympic stadium. 250 were identified as contaminated. 50 contaminated people were isolated in a camping area inside the Olympic Stadium for detailed screening. 20 of those people were hospitalized or transferred to housing for medical and nursing assistance. 8 patients transferred to the Navy Hospital in Rio, and residential contamination survey was initiated. The widespread contamination of downtown Joyana, 85 residents found to have significant contamination. 41 of those were evacuated, and few were completely and partially demolished. People across contaminated houses hundreds of miles away. There were 3 hotspots that were found in scrap metal yards and 1 house. Of this complete incident, 4 fatalities happened. 2 men, 1 woman, and 1 child. 28 patients had radiation-induced skin injuries where they held and played with the source for extended periods of time. 50 people isolated and hospitalized had significant internal deposition and external contamination. The detectable ground contamination can be found miles away and downwind. Anything that you come in contact with these pieces of radiological material, whether they be airborne or a solid source, can cause a downwind contamination or in the ground up to miles away. This is an example that was put together, a hypothetical situation that if there was something done at the police department in San Francisco, how far the detection could be RIID. If they will make it airborne, which is in this example, it can be miles away, and you can see in the table there, and look at the map, the colors dictate the amount of disbursement and how far away it could really get. Enabling objectives, we're going to define a primary screening and its role in the PRD mission, explain the importance of instrument calibration and pre-operational check, assess the scene and ensure a safe operating environment, detect elevated radiation levels, verify radiation alarms, locate radioactive material, measure radiation levels, adjudicate the alarm, and evacuate the totality of circumstances. The PRD process. Primary screening is the first phase of 4 phases processing. The primary screener has authority and responsibility for performing the primary screening process of detecting, verifying, locating, measuring, and adjudicating or elevating the situation as needed. This primary screener must coordinate with secondary screeners as required if adjudication cannot be accomplished through primary screening alone. What does primary screening look like? This gentleman has a radiological detection backpack on, and he's walking down a dock, which could pick up anything that could be in any one of these boats. This gentleman here is just walking through the city with a backpack. He's not easily detectable because it's just a backpack, but he's constantly monitoring his detection device and seeing if he can pick up anything. A primary screening tool, which is a backpack, which we have that we gained through a grant. It can pick up gamma or neutron detectors. It has many different types of alarms. It can be a sound, it could be a visual, it has no vibrate alarm. Sometimes they're kind of heavy and bulky, but they're concealed in a backpack, so it could be very easily not detected. They have a great distance that they can pick up the radiological material rather than a PRD, which is a personal radiation device. They are a lot more expensive, bigger, but a lot more effective. A pre-operational instrument check ensures instruments ready for service. Use a known source, a button source, and you can use it to make sure your equipment is operating properly before you take it into the field to use. Screening considerations. Your ability to detect the radiation source is affected by several variables. Time spent near the suspected source, and the speed at which you survey. Distance from the detector to the suspected source. Shielding between detector and suspected source. Geometry of the detector in relation to the suspected source. Size of the detector within the detection system used, and the background radiation levels and natural resources. Screening considerations. Your time. A static or stationary source versus a mobile source. A static source is going to be a lot easier to read because it's not moving. Offset to maximizing detector size and reducing detector distance. Screening considerations. Distance. As distance increases, count rate decreases. The greater distance means less sensitivity. You could have to be further away or closer to be able to get the proper reading. Decreasing distance by half increases sensitivity by 4. Shielding considerations. Shielding. Any material between source and detector can affect the ability to detect the radiation signature. The denser or thicker the material, the greater the shielding effect. Water is a great shield for neutrons. Screening considerations. A larger system size will have a larger reading detection. So obviously a PRD, which is about the size of a pager, doesn't have a very big area that it surveys as you're using it. A backpack, on the other hand, will have a large screening area and be able to detect more sources from further away. Screening considerations, your background. Levels may vary greatly due to naturally occurring and other legitimate non-threat sources. Ceramics, radium-containing objects, old watches or compasses, or anything that could be in the ground already. Levels may also vary due to differences in venue location and building materials. Large parking structures made out of concrete, bridges, steel structures, marble, granite, sandstone are some of the examples. The primary screening process. There are 5 basic steps to primary screening. Detect, verify, locate, measure, adjudicate. Detect. Understand your equipment's functions, limitations, and operability. Assess the scene for all safety concerns and hazards. Follow all SOP guidance for detection procedures. Perform a background radiation survey to determine the normal radiation levels at the venue. When you find a potential source, remain calm. Determine the origin. Is it a person or object? Is it moving or stationary? How far away is it? And is it a legitimate source? Always maintain total situational awareness. Any incident is a potential criminal case. Proper documentation is crucial in criminal proceedings. Verify. Working in groups, verification can be accomplished by another operator's PRD or backpack. If alone, backtrack and try to repeat the alarm. If not verified, process stops until target is reacquired. Locate. Left, right, up, down. Determine your source location. A U and inverted U, localization on human body. Rotational scan. Separation and isolation. People, vehicles, backpacks. Shielding, and vary the speed at which you do your scan. Locate. Left and right. Retrace your steps. Find the spot halfway between the alarms. Determine the direction of the large source or find a mass source. Rotate and use your body as a shield. Measure. Choose the appropriate equipment for situation. Record measurements as close as possible and at a second distance away, such as 1 foot or 1 meter from the source object. Displays vary between manufacturers. Record the highest reading encountered during this phase. Adjudicate. Adjudicate at the lowest level is always preferred. Follow initial detection. Consider the following: equipment malfunctions, explainable change in the norm to your normal background, knowledge of a patrol area, intelligence information, legitimate sources, which are medical devices, and interviews of people involved. Adjudication is a learned skill. Make an informed, rational decision based on the totality of circumstances. There is not a threat, or there is a threat. If you cannot decide, then secondary screening and/or reachback will be needed to help adjudicate the situation. Supervisory personnel may not be trained in the PRD mission. If elevated or secondary screening and/or reachback, be prepared to provide information in an easily understood, non-technical format. Know your agency-specific guidance documents for requested additional resources. Primary screening review. Where is the radiation signal coming from? Is it moving? Is it stationary? Is there shielding interfering? Things that can confuse your device are shielding, masking with multiple resources, direction of a moving source. How do you localize the source of radiation? Define secondary screening and its role within the PRD mission, validate equipment readiness, review the proper techniques, tactics, and procedures for secondary screening. Prepare the RIID for use, remove archive spectra files, and adjudicate the alarm. The PRD process, secondary screening, is the second phase of a 4-phase process. Secondary screening is used when the situation cannot be resolved with instruments or expertise on scene using primary screening. Requires collecting additional data using a radioisotope identification device, which is a RIID. Includes verifying information obtained during primary screening and weighing the information against the results obtained from secondary screening. It provides the data needed by technical reachback experts to help identify the radioactive source, and utilizes the totality of circumstances principle to adjudicate the alarm. Secondary screening can be used during any type of mission. High-profile overt operations, which is officers dressed in uniform and conspicuously involved in radiation detection efforts, provides a visible deterrent of smuggling a radioactive nuclear material, or a low-profile covert operation. Radiation detection devices concealed and not readily apparent or visible. Terrorists may avoid smuggling radioactive nuclear material through areas where they believe low-profile operations may be conducted. Primary screening versus secondary screening. Your primary screening is going to be your initial alarm. You're going to verify the alarm, localize where it's coming from, interview and assess, measure and take readings, collect additional data, and request secondary screening if needed. A secondary screening is going to cause you to have to prepare your instruments, survey the scene, isolate the source of radiation, collect your spectra with your instrument, collect additional data, attempt identification with your instrument, and contact technical reachback if necessary or required. Low resolution RIIDs. Secondary screening tools that can pick up gamma and or neutron detectors. Various modes of operation are dose rate, locate, and identify. You can identify gamma emitting isotopes. You may measure neutrons in counts per second or counts per minute. You always want to make sure you save your spectrum for further analysis if we need it to transfer to reachback if needed. Gamma fingerprint. This is what is shown on your device when you incur a gamma ray. Every gamma ray has a different spectrum, which is what you see on the graph. They all have their own specific fingerprint that's going to make it different from the other and make it able to be identified. This is a gamma fingerprint of the background, which is just your everyday stuff that's around you. This is a gamma fingerprint of technetium-99M. It just shows you the difference in what the levels of radiation that it's putting off. Here's another example of a gamma fingerprint, which is uranium-235. This shows the difference between a low resolution RIID and a high resolution RIID, and how they determine the peaks to make sure they know exactly the isotope that they're dealing with. Secondary screening process: validate, locate, measure, collect, and save. Validate equipment readiness. To ensure the equipment readiness, follow procedures in accordance with your SOPs. If the instrument fails to start up energy calibration, it should be placed out of service. Ensure instrument is set to the correct date and time, which is very important when you do a reach back with a secondary screening process. Clear the memory of any old spectra files. Verify spectra collection time from a known source, an unknown source, and your background. Verify calibration accuracy using a check source, which is a button source. We do have a capability of having those to be able to check our equipment. Consider what makes a good calibration source, such as cobalt-60 or cesium-137. When in doubt, use calibration sources that emit gamma rays at a variety of energies. Locate the radioactive source. Determine where the source of radiation is coming from. Point the detector towards it. Think three-dimensional. Use up, down, front, back, left, right. Continue your search until you reach your highest reading, which is the peak. Measure radiation levels. Verify with distance. Get closer, get further away. Use appropriate units. Your gamma dose rate. Our equipment will automatically determine the gamma dose rate. We don't have to do that. And the neutron count rate, which it will also do on its own, whether it's counts per second or counts per minute. Collect and save your spectra. The distance from the source is something that you need to keep note of. The amount of time needed to collect adequate data, the number of spectra collected, repeat measurement with the same or preferably different detector. Anticipate you will need reachback. 3 spectrum files will be needed once again. Your known source, your background, and an unknown target source. Whenever possible, collect a 5-minute spectrum of each file, which is also 300 seconds. Record the stored spectrum file number and type. Your secondary screening process with you can see here on a Cobalt 60, a 55-second screen, it doesn't get as detailed. With a 300-second or 5-minute screening process, you get a much more detailed spectrum that will make it easier to identify if we have to use a reachback. Collected on spectrum, the same amount of time as the target and background spectra. If available, record the isotope and quantity of the source. We may not know that, but it could be readily available on the package or whatever the source is in. Record the distance from the source. Collect the background spectrum away from the target but in the same general area and environment, the same amount of time as the target, using the same RIID for the target. Collect the unknown target spectrum. Obtain a 300-second or 5-minute spectrum on the target if possible. Record the measurement distance from the source. Record isotope identifier by the RIID. Record neutron count rate, whether it's counts per second or counts per minute. Identify any intervening shielding materials present, whether it be concrete or the side of a truck. Obtain dose rate measurements at 2 different distances from the object. Collect pictures documenting the process, and we can send those to reachback to give them the best possible process that we used to get our spectrum. Dead time. A high gamma dose rate environment will severely limit the detector's ability to collect a spectrum. Adjust the source to detector distance to limit dead time impact. You may have to leave the detector in an area and maintain a safe distance until the data is collected, and then go back and pick up your detector because it could be too strong of a source for you to stay near. Performing a spectra ID. Nucleides are generally classified according to their typical use. MED, which indicates a medical radioisotope. IND is an industrial radioisotope. NUC is a byproduct produced from fissile material, which is also considered nuclear. And NORM, which indicates your naturally occurring radioactive material. These categories reflect the groups of libraries set up in your detection instrument. Identification issues, not in library or not identified. Our piece of equipment may not have a specific radioisotope in our library, so we might not be able to identify it, but if we take the spectrum and can send it to reachback, they might be able to identify it. Low activity may be displayed if the acquisition time is too short or the radiation level is too low. Sometimes you might have to go more than 5 minutes. Sometimes it'll be longer. It might only take a minute to identify, but at the same time, it could take 10 minutes. Our instrument also has a readout on it that tells you it needs to be closer to identify, or you need to move further away because it's too strong. You don't want to be that close. Performing a spectral ID. Identify the source or isotope of radiation causing the alarm and assess the threat potential. Special nuclear material used in nuclear weapons, such as uranium-235, plutonium-239, Neptunium-237, or uranium-233. All of these will be able to be identified by our equipment. Totality of circumstances. The RIID is just another tool, not a total solution. Using the information along with the other data collected to determine the legitimacy of the source. We're just going to be able to identify it. It's not like we're going to be able to dispose of it or anything like that. But every bit of information that we see of how it's packaged to where it's placed at is all things that we need to remember and write down, so we have all of that information to be able to use for interviews and things of that sort. Adjudicating the alarm. Assess the potential hazards to ensure your safety. Are there explosives present? Are the radiation levels safe? Always remain calm if there's no immediate safety hazard. Is it a legitimate or suspicious source? The presence of special nuclear material should be considered first. Always maintain situational awareness. Use all available information to make the decision. Follow your SOPs and protocols. If unable to adjudicate, the secondary screener must be able to identify the need for additional resources. Know the protocols for requesting additional support capabilities, such resources. Basically, in this section, we learned about secondary screening and its role in the PRD mission, the secondary screening process, how to make sure we start up our equipment correctly and validate that our equipment is ready to use, how to locate radioactive material, up, down, left, right, make sure we get the proper area with the highest reading, and that's where we want to take our spectrum, how to prepare our RIID for use, make sure we always delete our archive spectra files because we don't want to send those if we go for reach back, because then they're going to be included in what they send us to be able to know how to adjudicate the alarm. Terminal performance objective. Given instructional material and instructional administration. In this section, we're going to discuss the effect of instrument limitations, including environmental considerations on instrument operation, pre-check computers for proper field performance, collect the required 3 spectra samples, which are a known source or unknown source in our background, document the measurements and results in accordance with SOPs, demonstrate the alarm adjudication process, threat analysis of spectra, and identification of potential threat or non-threatening material to include actions being taken through reach back towards event resolution. Contact JACUS or Department of Energy Triage. Discuss documented information with JACUS and or DOE Triage. Upload spectra to reach back, including but not limited to connecting equipment to a laptop, naming files, assessing the reach back, operating transmission software, protocols for evidence collection, and reach back support. Receive confirmation that spectra files were received. Detection of threat isotopes, detection of unexpected neutron radiation, presence of multiple isotopes or shielding, inconclusive RIID identification, isotope identified not consistent with situation, a high security event where accuracy is of paramount importance. Case in point for us would be an event like Thunder over Louisville. Reachback is a technical asset available to assist secondary screeners in adjudicating alarm events. Spectra files can be transmitted to Reachback or to a national asset spectroscopist, which is Triage or JACUS. An accurate method for confirming isotope identification is to have a spectroscopist examine the RIID files. Spectra files contain a unique energy signature for each gamma-emitting radioactive isotope. These files can often be difficult to interpret because of multiple isotopes. Our background radiation was not taken properly. It could be shielding or masking with another radioactive isotope or a gauge shift. Multiple isotopes, a truck with contaminated scrap metal. The RIID reported one thing, but the spectrum analysis shows that it's 2 different isotopes. Any spectrum obtained is actually a combination of the source of the ambient background, which is everything around where the source is. Instrument ID results can be impacted by structural surroundings such as granite, marble, bridges, tunnels, cobblestone streets, concrete. Shielding. Many algorithms recognize that detectors are more effective at lower energies and ignore the presence of higher energy gamma rays that have a lower probability of detection. Lower energy gamma rays are more easily shielded than the higher energy ones. It is possible that the low energy peaks can be completely eliminated by shielding. This is an example of cobalt-60 unshielded and shielded. As you can see with the unshielded, you have higher peaks in your spectrum. When it's heavily shielded, you have lower peaks, so it's going to make it harder to detect. Masking. Masking involves the presence of more than one source. A legitimate or explainable source is used to hide an illicit source. 2 scenarios. A high activity source used to mask a source or sources with low energy signatures, such as a large cobalt-60 source masking a uranium-235 source. Or you can have sources of similar energies that can confuse a RIID identification. Example is cobalt-57 source can be used to mask a uranium-235 source. A gain shift. The most common cause of a gain shift is a change in the temperature of the detector. You always want to start your detector, take your background, and do all your readings in an area that is the same temperature and area that you're going to take your reading for your source to be able to, for your equipment to be able to properly identify it. If you start your system and your equipment up inside of a building and then you take it outside and use it, it's probably going to have a significant gain shift and you're not going to be able to identify the isotope properly. JACUS, the Joint Analysis Center Collaborative Information System. They have the ability to adjudicate alarms at a local or state level with the capability to elevate an alarm to national level reach back. A geological information system with integrated national feed. They're going to take this spectrum that you've sent them and give it to many people to be able to figure out exactly what you're dealing with and send the information back to you. JACUS can also provide operational guidance for your instruments. They have state and local contacts of people we can call to have more resources sent to us. The JACUS is an easy to use interface. It has a profile section that stores user details. It has an inventory of radiological and nuclear assets, including location, contact information, and calibration dates. A good example of that would be medical devices. Three spectrum files are needed when you collect your spectra: a known source, your unknown or target source, and a background. Like we said before, whenever possible, collect a full 5-minute spectrum for each file, which would be your known, your unknown, or target source, and your background. You're going to record and store all those files into a corresponding file type to be able to send to them. When you're uploading a spectra, it may involve physically connecting the cables from the RIID to a serial or USB connection of the laptop. You could send them over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Most of them have a proprietary software that must be installed on your laptop. And you can also send these through an email once you download these into your software. Supporting information: your neutrons intervening materials such as shielding, any photographs or pictures you can take to attach to the file, the event information, contact information of who you are, where you work and who you're sending this in for, any technical information such as what your measurement devices are, if it's a medical patient, information, and has the Department of Energy been notified. This is an access to reachback capabilities. If you want to keep this as a quick reference, you could take a picture of this screen. This is a quick overview of the PRD process. Primary screening could be a law enforcement officer with a small portable radiation device, which is like a pager on his belt. He could stop somebody and pick a hit up, and he could investigate and adjudicate all at the same time and let them go because there's no threat. If there is a threat, they can call for a secondary inspection, which we would turn around and do an inclusive and make a confirmation whether it's a threat or not. If it is a threat, we can reach back to JACUS or the Department of Energy and give them an assessment report and secure and isolate and make the proper response. We learned about the effects of the instrument limitations, including environmental considerations on instrument operation. We always make sure we pre-check our computers for proper field performance, our Wi-Fi cards, and so forth. Collect the required 3 spectra sources, which are our known source, our unknown source, and our background. We want to make sure we try to do those for the full 5 minutes if possible. Document all measurements and results. Demonstrating the alarm adjudication process, threat analysis of spectra, and identification of potential threat and non-threatening material to include actions being taken through reachback for event resolution. We learned about contacting JACUS, discussing the documented information within JACUS, uploading spectra to reachback, including but not limited to connecting equipment to a laptop, naming the files, assessing the reachback, operating transmission software, protocols for evidence collection and reachback report, receiving a confirmation from JACUS that spectra files were received. This is going to be one of our last things we're going to do. This is a case study of a dump truck at a landfill. The detector's alarm as the dump truck entered the landfill. They performed a survey with a handheld instrument, indications of plutonium-239. The RIID data, the spectrum that it first took was the exterior of the truck. Spectrum 2, they took the background, which is everything around. And spectrum 3 identified the isotope as cesium-137, was a check source. When they got all of their information and they sent it back for reachback, they identified the material as lutetium-177. Lutetium-177 is known to be used for cancer research therapy. Lutetium-177 energy lines similar to plutonium-239. So just because it says one thing, it might not be. With the shielding of the truck and things like that, the instrument was not able to pick up that it was a cancer therapy source. It picked it up as something else. So that's why they did reach back, and they came up with what was known as a medical waste.